Welcome to Executive Insights. My guest today is Vicki Bradley, Executive Coach, founder and CEO of Women in Leadership Empowered, a virtual leadership development platform for women. In this episode today, we covered a spectrum of important topics: talent and leadership development, strategies for incorporating diversity and inclusion into your corporate DNA, finding your digital voice, effective mentorship and sponsorship in a virtual environment. Last but not least, Vicki shared some great insights into finding the motivation and certitude when facing a career-changing decision. Hi, Vicki. So great to have you today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Talent remains a priority and a challenge for any organizations to survive and thrive. What's your advice for leaders who are faced with shrinking budgets that may affect their overall talent pipeline and business performance?
Yeah, well, certainly the times we're in now, Nasheen, has created more of a challenge, and your people are always your biggest asset. And even with budget cuts and sales shrinking, it's important to really identify where that talent lies within your organization, and how do you get your teams involved in the solutions. So even when we're having to make cuts, it's really important that there's transparency around that, because when leaders don't share that information, our talent knows anyway, right? Like, with everything going on, there's no way you can not know. So it is making them part of the solution and getting that input as to what things that you can do as a company to help everyone maintain their roles. But when you have really great talent, it's so critical that you're tapping into that and knowing what are their strengths and how do you utilize those strengths during a tough time. So I hope that's helpful. Sometimes what I hear is that our leaders haven't been as often in touch with COVID because it's hard, right? Because we're on the phone, we're on Zoom, and even having those connection points with your teams right now is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Great points. So a key to solidify a healthy foundation for organization is to establish a culture of diversity of background, experience, perspectives, and contributions. This can only be made possible if leaders put diversity and inclusion into their hiring, talent, and leadership development practice. Over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of effort made in this area in terms of air cover and groundwork to really help to advance the issue. And then COVID happened.
Yeah.
So how can organizations and leaders sustain the momentum and continue to drive change in the COVID time?
Well, I love that you brought this topic up, because I just did a session last week with a group of people talking about diversity in all aspects. And our conversation was around how do we get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And sometimes what happens, especially in a pandemic like we're in, is COVID becomes a nice to project. And so what I would say with diversity, it's making sure that that becomes part of your DNA, right? And so you mentioned, how to incorporate that into the recruitment and the talent selection process. It's not about ticking a box, right? It's really about making sure that that diversity of thought, gender diversity, race, religion, disability, all of those aspects are incorporated into our hiring practices. And another thing that I heard a lot of people talk about is incorporating emotional intelligence testing, especially for leadership, because that gives you the opportunity to see a person very holistically and what's important to them, and can they embrace diversity from all levels. And the other thing, Nasheen, that I would say is it starts at the top. So if you have, let's say, your middle management that's trying to drive diversity, unless that's coming from the top, it's very hard for them to be successful. And it's not just about setting an initiative to say we are a diverse multicultural, inclusive environment, but it's actually walking your talk. So it's looking at your organization. What is the makeup? And I've had lots of companies say to me, oh no, we have, 50% women. And I'm like, okay, great. So how many women are sitting at the table in your C-suite? Or how many Black people are sitting at the table in your C-suite? Or someone with disability? And then it becomes, oh, we haven't done a very good job at that. So entry level is usually really, really good. It's the more senior leadership levels that it becomes a challenge. But those are the most critical ones because that is what ripples through the organization. People need to see themselves sitting in those roles. And so taking a very close diagnostic look at how you're actually operating is paramount in this type of environment. And always, right? So making sure diversity, equity, inclusion is part of your everyday DNA practices. And there's a gentleman that I met last week that I'm super impressed by. So he's actually using data to quantify how that looks within an organization. Because when you see it black and white, then it becomes real versus I think we've done a great job on diversity. So those would be some of my comments, and really pushing our, talent selection process to incorporate a variety of individuals. It's not just who you know, which is how we've typically operated in the past, right? So really pushing that envelope.
Excellent advice, Vicki. In a remote working environment, I think it's, another challenge is it's very difficult to be seen and heard. And that is in particular true for women, especially young women. So how can women be seen and heard and continue to go after those opportunities in front of them?
Mm-hmm. Oh, you know what? That's so important right now. And I actually have had several clients I've been coaching around this. And, the reality of it is out of sight, out of mind. And unfortunately, the pandemic has created a more out of sight, out of mind situation for us. And especially for women, because, when you're in your career and if you've started a family already or you're caring for elderly parents, that gives you double duty with respect to being visible. And so some of the things that I would say is make sure that you are visible. So it is, reaching out to your boss, to your boss's boss, making sure that you're invited to those meetings, those sessions, setting up check-ins with your supervisor. I had one client recently who shared with me, she said, I have a new boss. He just took over when the pandemic hit. And she said, I've not had a touch base with him. It's been 6 months. And so I said to her, so you're going to have to initiate this and make sure he understands the importance because decisions are being made. And if you're not in the forefront or if your name is not there, your voice is not there, sometimes you get skipped over. So it is making sure that you're raising your hand. And it's also showing up, Nasheen, how you would show up if you were in the office. So, I've noticed even on some of my calls, clients will show up not put together as if they were going to work. And so it is making sure that, you're getting up and showing up every day, just like you would do if you were going into the office, especially from the waist up. It's making sure that you are putting your best self forward. And that, if you need to be more assertive with your boss, then be assertive, but making sure that you're reaching out and getting that time that you need.
Those are really excellent and practical advice, Vicki, and I love it and how you said it in terms of, what are some of the practical things that everyone can do to find their own digital voice and posture. The importance of mentorship and sponsorship is not to be underestimated in one's career. For those of us who are fortunate to be in the position to provide guidance and support, how can we operate more effectively in this virtual environment?
Well, I would say it's very similar to what we were just talking about, but it is reaching out, right? Connectivity is so important, and that human connection, regardless of whether it's on Zoom or it's in person, when we're in times like this, it's more so important, right? Because you don't know what the circumstances are when someone's at home. But when someone is just entering their career, finding different mentors is so important to them. And, you know, sometimes you just don't know where that's going to show up. Right. We can plan and be very intentional about mentors that we are looking for, but it's not discounting the person that you happenstance on. And, you know, you connect with that person, and it's having an open mind to be willing to learn and to hear a different perspective, because we all come with a different lens. And so I would say, you know, I reach out often, and I've probably connected more on LinkedIn since the pandemic happened than I have ever. And take that time, set up, you know, 15-minute coffee chats or 30-minute coffee chats if you have the luxury of that time. But it is imparting and sharing and finding out, you know, being curious. What is the person looking for? How can you support them? You know, one of the things that I've been doing a lot of is going to different conferences. I host a social on Well Empowered, and we bring people together intentionally to share what's working, what's not working, but also it's the connection, right? So we'll go into smaller breakout rooms so that they can actually have more one-on-one conversations where that mentoring can take place. And if it's sponsorship is typically someone who's advocating for you within your organization. So you got to make sure you know who are the people who can advocate for you. And it's establishing a relationship. Like, you can't just call up and say, Nasheen, I'd like you to sponsor me, because you're going to go, well, Vicki, I don't know enough about you, right? I don't know, you know, what's your history. So you have to establish a strong relationship in order for someone to have that confidence and trust to be able to sponsor you. So I stress that one, because sometimes we think, oh, it's just I asked somebody to do it. And so you're asking a lot when somebody advocates for you.
Totally agree. Thank you, Vicki. Uncertainties breed fear, but
Yes.
also create opportunities. So with the instability of the current economy and job market, some may ponder what the next step is for them. And I know you have a great story there. A few years ago, you made a gutsy decision to leave some of the top jobs in the corporate world and become your own boss. What motivated you, and what lessons and advice would you have for people who might be at the crossroads at their careers?
Yeah. 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 You know what, I loved what I did, Nasheen, and thank you for asking that. I loved my role as a senior executive and loved the teams that I led, but I got to a place where I wanted more. And, you know, I was helped along the way because I had some health issues that forced me to actually make some choices. But it was the best thing that ever happened, because I really got to tap into what I was passionate about. So I would say one of the most important things is to get clear. Like, what do you love, and can you turn that into a job and monetize it, right? Because the reality is we have to have a roof over our heads and food in our stomach. But how can you be very intentional with your purpose? And for me, it was about, how do I support women specifically, but I also work with men, but women specifically, in finding their voice. And, you know, some of the experiences I had as an executive was, you know, your confidence gets shaken because you're amongst a group that sometimes your voice doesn't get heard. And so I wanted to be able to impact others and help them find that confidence in what their inner power was able to do. And it is scary when you make that switch from going from a corporation where, you know, you have all the resources, you know, a paycheck's coming in, to going out on your own. And for me, it was really about feel the fear and do it anyway. You know, if I don't take that risk, then I will always wonder, and I don't want to have regrets when I'm, you know, when I'm 80 years old. I want to know that I have lived a full, impactful life, and that I've been able to help others and be in service to others. And so that was really what drove me. And I would say, you know, when you make that switch from a corporation to being an entrepreneur, you don't have those resources. And so it is not trying to do everything yourself. It's finding a support group that can help you navigate and help you know what some of the challenges will be that you come up against, because those are where the headaches come in. And you need to be focused on, what is your gift? What is your strength that you're bringing to this world? And stay focused on that, and the other stuff will come.
That's great, Vicki. Feel the fear and do it anyway. I totally love it. And thank you so much for this meaningful and insightful discussion, Vicki. And this is another episode of Executive Insights by the IT Media Group. Thank you for tuning in.